Welcome to the Healthy Human Revolution podcast. I'm Dr. Laurie Marbas, and today I'm so honored and thankful to see, now make sure I say this name correctly, Dr. Sanj Katyal.
Yep.
All right, I even got the right spin. Dr. Katyal has some really interesting story in a program about positive psychology for physicians. He's written a book, and we'll get into all of that. But I know the audience is familiar that me talking about positive psychology and the many benefits, but it'll be really nice to speak to another physician who has an interest, a keen interest in helping other physicians. And I think that's such an important thing, especially given the state of affairs with our mental health and everything. So Dr. Katyal, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in medicine and positive psychology?
Sure. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I did my undergrad at Carnegie Mellon here, and I decided late to go to medical school, uh, which I did at NYU School of Medicine. And I entered radiology back here at University of Pittsburgh, internship, residency, and fellowship, and was really interested in research for quite a while. And then I got more involved in the business of radiology. So I worked as a physician executive for a radiology startup company for about 10 years. And it was over that time where I was visiting a lot of different hospitals that I started noticing a lot of discontent among physicians. I would visit other, medical executive committee meetings, talk to hospital administrative leaders, and it became clear that something was going on in medicine over the last 10 years. And I could kind of relate it to my own story because I remember one day, I don't know, maybe 12 years ago, driving home, and I was kind of thinking to myself, wondering why I wasn't happier. It's not that I was unhappy, but I had achieved really more than anything I could have ever dreamed of. I was married to my best friend. We have a great relationship. We have 4 healthy kids. I had a great job that I really liked. I was designing kind of innovative workflow. Uh, and growing up, I really had no real tragedy. Had enough money, parents are all alive, live close by, and I began to really wonder and really got concerned if I couldn't figure out how to experience more joy and fulfillment when things were this good. How was I ever really going to deal with adversity when it would inevitably come, which, by the way, it did. So I really began searching for answers, and really I was searching for answers to a single question: how can I learn not just to function, but to actually flourish? And that's what drove me to study philosophy. And I was reading a book called Happier by Tal Ben-Shahar, whose claim to fame is he taught the largest class at Harvard in positive psychology in the late 90s. I reached out to him and asked, I told him I loved the book. It was a kind of a scientific model of happiness. And I asked how I could learn more. And he invited me to apply to a 1-year kind of intensive program in positive psychology that he was running, which I completed along with positive psychology coaching. And as an engineer and then as a physician, the scientific background and emphasis of positive psychology really makes a lot of sense to me. And I've been deep into it ever since.
That's really interesting. So I like how you said, everything in your life was going well per society's judgment, right? So you had the possessions and the relationships that would essentially tell you you should be happy. So I think we misunderstand what that means, because then you mentioned the word joy. So can you explain the difference between happiness versus joy?
Yeah, sure. I really try not to use the word happy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's overused, and I think the reason I have the biggest problem with it is because it's really used incorrectly. If I ask people, do you want to be happy? The answer is of course. If I then ask them, well, what does it mean to be happy? The answer becomes a little less obvious, right? I was happy last weekend when I was on call, or I'll be happy in 2 weeks when I'm on vacation. And that's not the kind of happiness that Aristotle was talking about when he made his famous quote, that happiness is the end and aim of human existence, right? The word that he and other philosophers used was eudaimonia, which is really translated to mean human flourishing, right? A state of optimal living over a long period of time. And so that's what that's the word, flourishing is the word that I use. And that's the word that Dr. Seligman uses in his book, Flourish, right? That's why he uses it, right? What has to go right in all aspects of our lives over a long period of time, not just how do I feel today or yesterday when I'm going through, whatever it is you go through at whatever stage of training you're in.
Exactly. My daughter, my oldest, is a second year medical student. So I have a keen interest in making sure she stays on the flourishing side of things. So I think it's important for all of us as physicians and parents and teachers and, anyone who has some type of experience or job or some type of relationship where we're teaching others to listen to what you're saying and understand. I like how you said that. It's like optimal living over a long period of time. So very cool. And so you went on and you did your year program. Can you tell us what that was like? Like, what were you learning? What surprised you? Just really interested in seeing how that transformed you as a person.
Yeah, that was a great program. It was put on by the Whole Being Institute, and I strongly encourage people that are interested in this topic to look into that. It was 2 1-week immersions on the beginning and back end of the course, and then a lot of online work and group work via phone calls. And, just the concepts that were taught were just phenomenal concepts. Things like, obviously we touched upon the big ones like grit, resiliency that are pretty common in positive psychology literature. But things like hedonic adaptation, which I think is especially useful for physicians. That's basically a principle that was articulated 2,000 years ago by the Stoics, but basically says that we adapt to everything in our life that's positive and constant, right? So that's why we take for granted our jobs. The initial thrill of making an attending salary soon goes quickly away and is replaced by making partner in a group, or eventually, when can I retire? You just get used to every stage of your life. And that's a problem for physicians because we're masters of delayed gratification, right? We're always put our heads down, work hard, and when we get through this, we can relax, enjoy life, be happy, right? But if you get to that stage and then you get used to that after a while, it's really, really a difficult problem for physicians. And I think that concept alone explains a lot of the discontent that many feel in their life. So it was kind of things like that were really eye-opening.
How did this transform in your life? So you went from looking back and going, why aren't I feeling joy and satisfaction, I guess, to after this going back, and how did that change you personally?
It was transformative. I mean, I was able to understand myself more, and a lot of this stuff is just self-awareness too, right? Sometimes we get the habit of just, pushing through things, pushing through problems, and not stopping to think about, is this am I on the right path? Am I doing the right things in my life? So this was kind of a pause button for me to do that. And then there were a lot of positive psychology interventions that I experimented with along the way that really made a meaningful impact to me. I'll give you an example, that hedonic adaptation, the cure for taking everything for granted in your life that's constant, that's there, whether it's your spouse or your kids or whatever, is to learn how to pay attention to them. And cultivation of attention is huge. And I think attention's going to be the new currency. Excuse me. And so, the way to pay attention is to really cultivate an attitude of appreciation for the things you have in life. And Tal Ben-Shahar, my mentor, said, when you appreciate the good appreciates. And that's really, I think, the cornerstone of positive psychology, and the scientific study of gratitude and how to cultivate gratitude is perhaps, I think, positive psychology's greatest contribution to the field. So.
I agree. Attention is the new currency, especially in today's world with instant gratification, technology. Our faces are in our phones.
Yeah.
I do telemedicine now, and I've been doing that for about little over a year. And it's really interesting. It used to bug me to no end when on a few patients would bring in like their cell phone or they're talking on a phone and tell me to wait while they're talking on their phone.
That's crazy.
Oh, I could tell stories. But anyway, outside of that, well, now I'm talking to someone you think you're going to have to pay eye attention. Like this is a screen. I'll be seeing them on their cell phone. So there's this interactive web interaction occurring, but I can see that they're still typing and paying attention to a computer or watching television. And there are days that I just have to take a deep breath and go, Laurie, it's okay.
Yeah,
And I'll say, excuse me, what did you say? Can you hear me? So I just make a nice little interjection like, oh, okay. Yeah. And it's an interesting situation, but I think it's really important even for parents, right? Because we want our children, to cultivate good relationships and understand how to interact with people. I think we're missing to the growing up. These kids are going to miss the subtle cues of facial expressions and body language and, calling someone up and calling them on the phone and meeting them in person. I think we're missing out on that. And I think there's some problems with us as parents too, because we're ignoring our kids. It seems that we're so distracted by other things. And have you seen that occur with physicians and as far as their relationships with colleagues or peers or interactions with their spouses and family? Because I really think that's important.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a huge problem. I mean, when I ran a large group of about 100 radiologists when I was at the startup company, and when after a while it became clear to me that I had to basically take people's phones, and we had to put their phones down on the end of the table because they just couldn't. It was like it was literally an addiction for them. Mm-hmm. And the thing with kids, I mean, I teach a positive psychology class at a local college, and we had our final presentations yesterday, and half the class, what they wanted to fix about themselves or improve about themselves was their cell phone use, their addiction to it. And so I think you're going to see a lot more cell phone detoxes and apps that are, designed to, keep our attention, as opposed to these, designed right now to just basically hijack as much of it as they can get. So
absolutely,
physicians are no different, and I think it affects their interaction with their patients. It certainly interferes with their interaction with their colleagues.
Right.
I've seen it many times in hospitals.
Oh, absolutely. Have you read the book, The Craving Mind by Dr. Judson Brewer?
No.
You might find it interesting. I have it here somewhere. Here it is. So I interviewed Dr. Brewer, and actually I'll be putting up his podcast later. And it's basically it's this one here for people who want to see it. And he's a psychiatrist and also a researcher. He's an MD, PhD. Like one degree is not enough. Yeah. And but it's fascinating. His TED Talk in 2016 was the fourth most watched, has like 10 million views or something. It's incredible. Wow. But he's speaking regarding mindfulness and using it in addictions, like with smoking, describing anxiety and different things. But what you were just talking about, how this cell phone use has become an addiction, but he talks about it like the habit loop. And, you get this cue, this routine and this reward, and there's this negative reinforcement and a positive reinforcement. You do something because it feels good, but then you do something because it helps you avoid feeling negative. So it's really interesting. So the cell phone use, it's positive because you're seeing people like your stuff. But then if you find that being distracted by the cell phone makes you forget that you're sad one day, then it reinforces it negative. So then you got these double whammies, just feeding this habit loop, and it's really hard to break. And it's a really fascinating book.
Oh, that's good. I'll check it out.
Yeah. And there's another really good one too that I think complements it, is James Clear's Atomic Habits.
Oh yeah, I've read that.
I interviewed him too. Fascinating story.
Yeah.
Great story of his how it all developed. And there's some good stuff in there. Yeah, like I said, I love this stuff, so I could talk for hours. And so whenever you said you'd be okay with the interview, I was like, yes. I get to talk an hour for my stuff, and my husband's just like, okay. He's an engineer, so this is funny. It's funny. I know you were an engineer. It sounds like. What
Yeah,
type of engineer were you before?
I was a chemical biomedical, but I never,
Oh, okay.
I don't
He's a
identify as an engineer.
Yeah, he's a civil engineer and he's just into data and
Yeah.
crunching numbers and the stuff that would like literally drive me utterly insane.
Yeah.
So anyway, none of the children wanted to be an engineer. He's so sad. Oh my goodness. Anyway, I'm curious too, what you have a course that you offer on your website regarding physicians and I believe it's called the Positive Psychology Program for Physicians.
Yes.
And physicians who enter through that, have they been in contact with you and have you seen any changes? Like, can you give an example of where you're like, wow, this is what this stuff really works. This positive psychology can really turn lives around.
Yeah, sure. The reason I put it into a website is I've been doing the program informally uh, during my management of about 100 radiologists. So there were a lot of, if you get 100 physicians, there's going to be, it's like a bell curve, right? There's going to be the top 10% that are high performers and high functioning and doing pretty good. Most people are in between, and then there's the bottom, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I focused on the kind of people that were definitely at the bottom, but also at the lower end of the middle pack.
Mm-hmm.
And I just started having these sessions with them, and I basically created them in 5 different sessions, and I measured well-being at the beginning and at the end, and there was about a 34% improvement in their well-being from this program. Now, some people had more, some people had less, but on average, that's basically what it was.
How do
Uh,
you measure well-being?
there's a couple different scales you can use. Peggy Kearns out of Australia has a PERMA score, which PERMA is Marty Seligman's kind of latest uh, flourishing components. There's also on AuthenticHappiness.org, which is a site sponsored by the University of Pennsylvania. There's a bunch of well-being surveys, and the main well-being survey on that is pretty easy. It's only like 45 questions or so, and that's been statistically valid. It's been reliable over periods of time, and it's found to change with certain positive interventions that
Hmm.
have been done. So I use a combination of that for people that are a little bit lower on the flourishing scale. I use the burnout score, but this is the program is designed for everybody, wherever you are on your flourishing scale, right? Traditional psychology focused on somebody who's functioning at a -8 and bringing them to a 0 or a +1 if you're lucky, right? Um, Positive psychology focuses on somebody who's a +1, +2. Again, functioning fine, successful by every metric of society, but not fulfilling their unique potential, right? Not thriving, not flourishing. And it takes those people from a +1 or +2 and tries to move them to a +8. And I think we need both areas of focus.
Hmm.
Uh, for too long, I think as long as somebody's functioning, we as society feel that they're okay. But there's a lot of unrealized potential in a lot of physicians that I know. And the unrealized potential is the cause of their discontent many times.
Hmm. I think you're right because I know myself as a physician, there was a period of time, so I was active duty in the Air Force as well for some time, and then I went to Colorado. And so you're seeing, as primary care doc, a lot of chronic disease and multiple medications, and people are constantly in pain. And, there's a huge, as we all know, rapid rise of not only chronic disease, but depression, anxiety. So then I discovered lifestyle medicine, where I focused on positive psychology is part of it, nutrition, exercise, but it's the communication with the patient is different. The focus is different. So instead of me saying, well, I'm going to write you another prescription to control this blood pressure, to get these numbers down, my voice has changed. My words have changed. So that whole point of what you described is, we want to study what is right rather than what is wrong. The same idea I tell my patients. I said, it's more than me just getting you to a normal metric that I'm measuring, but I want you to thrive in life. So you have to see me less, if not at all. And that really sparks an interest for patients, because nobody speaks like that. So it's really important that we speak hope, because it does. It speaks hope into, it kind of gets that light going. And that actually keeps me, or like the burnout that I was dealing with, because nothing is more stressful than being an active duty member in the military as a physician,
Yeah.
is literally because soldiers and physicians have some of the highest suicide rates. And I can tell you why. Not that I had that, but I saw some things. But it's really interesting how you change when you speak to others, you speak differently to yourself. And it's really cool, because now you get excited when you see patients like, ooh, a diabetic, I can work on this. Before it was like, oh, a diabetic, another blood sugars, who knows what, it's a completely shift on how you're focusing, and it changes you. It's really cool.
Yeah,
Really.
that's tremendous. I think medicine needs more of that, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we had spoken about Carolyn Miller, and I just kept telling her, I was like, if I wish I had time and the money to go do the master's program at UPenn for the positive psychology, is that my life was just utter chaos at this point. I got two in college, and I'm also an editor for a medical journal, and I got my full-time job, and I'm like, eh. But it's so important to talk to these young physicians and these medical students to get them on the right path. But then also think about it, the social contagion factor. If we could teach these people who have, one, their authority figures and people respect them, and that social contagion, if I have 2,000 on my panel and I teach even a third of them some type of positive psychology and flourishing, that effect would just ripple. It would be
That's
really
exactly
cool.
right. And that's why I teach physicians, because everybody you help helps their patients, and it's basically an exponential cascade.
Exactly. It's a perfect example when I help someone, let's say, reverse their diabetes, and then they teach a family member what they've been learning, which is very simple. This is basic stuff. And then they're seeing these positive things. It's so much more enjoyable to hear those stories. And it comes back to you. I'm a big fan of karma. You put that good stuff out, it comes back.
As am
So
I. I agree.
absolutely. So I'm curious too, when you mentioned the word well-being. I think I like the word well-being, and I like the word thriving. What does it mean to have well-being? How can a person measure or think to themselves, I'm in a state of well-being, or I need to work on this? Like how would someone begin to self-analyze and see what's going on?
Well, I use the word well-being because I hate the word happiness, because there's a lot of uh, self-help books and stuff like that out there that just, I think,
Yes.
overuse it, and I think are doing somewhat of a disservice to people when they think that you can instantly choose to be happy without changing your behaviors and your habits in a meaningful way. I think that's not exactly accurate. And so well-being to me, is a state of it's really a state of flourishing in all aspects of your life. So, are, are you using your talents and abilities um, to make a difference in the world, right? That's one aspect of it, right? Are you raising responsible, resilient kids who care about the world and not just their next video game or iPhone version, right?
Hmm.
Are you physically, mentally, emotionally fit, right? Are you, using things like, nutrition, yoga, meditation to, it really boils down to, are you trying to improve to be the best version of yourself And then are you using that best self in a service larger than yourself, right? That's in the nutshell, that's flourishing, right?
Hmm.
Cultivating your best self and then using that to alleviate suffering or make an impact in the world.
I like that. I think it goes back to purpose.
Yeah.
And at least I know I've wanted to be a doctor since I was like 10. And when you get to medicine and medical school, I mean, one, it's just fun going through medical school because my kids were 5, 3, and 10 months when I started medical
Wow.
school. I got to make it harder as possible. But what was fascinating was, just surviving that, knowing that we could come out of it intact family. And they weren't too worse for the wear. But actually, when you look back and like, I think, was this what I thought it would be? And it was really interesting as you evolve in medicine, right? So you go from a student and you're learning and you're scared to ask questions and you're like, do I have the right answer? Do I not have the right answer? And then you go, to your fourth year and then they're like, like come to our program, come, you're like, oh, I'm special. Yeah, you're that senior thing. And then you're back down at the really bottom of the totem pole. It's just so interesting to see the swing of things. And if you don't have, I think, a solid ground of what you're doing and why you're doing it, it can be, if you relate yourself to someone's opinion of you and you judge that and you don't have that purpose driven down deep, it can be a very, very dark place. And so I certainly had seen that with other patients. And I mean, there were moments that I was like, why am I doing this? So, but my purpose was like, because I want to take care of people. And that was my driving force, regardless of, like you said, delayed gratification. There's a lot of delayed gratification when you're being told things. And anyway, but how does someone, do you think, reach that point where they, like, so you mentioned activating their best self? How do they determine what is their best self? Because sometimes people, no one sat down and said, what are your desires? What is your thought process? For example, my youngest, Gabriel, he thought he wanted to go into medical school. He he was like, he was loved being a lifeguard, and they were learning how to do CPR, and he's my one that likes to go snowboarding and jump, rock climbing and all that, high adrenaline stuff. Because I
Yeah.
want to be an ER doc, mom. I'm like, okay. So, and he graduated second in his class. Phenomenal kid, super bright, communicates well grounded. They're good kids. But when he got through his first semester at college in Boulder, Colorado, and he's like, I don't think this is it for mom. I was like, but Gabe, look back at what you've always enjoyed. He's always enjoyed making film and video. I mean, this kid's been doing camera work, and since he was, I mean, I don't know, I can remember the last time he didn't have a camera or filming or making videos and stories and like little documentaries. Gabriel, it's like, follow your passion. That where to be. And now he's doing film studies and he's as happy as a lark. He loves it. No one sits down. I mean, if, I don't know, how do you begin that conversation with someone?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think looking back to what you love to do as a child can offer a lot of clues to what feels right to you. I think staying true to your childhood aspirations and interests before you got indoctrinated by society is an important thing. The other thing is there's a whole field of character strengths, right? That these are unique attributes that positive psychology is has elucidated for us, right? It's basically the positive version of the DSM, right? Organized under six major virtues, right? So
I love that. That's the absolute antagonist to the DSM. I love that.
basically, right?
That is
Uh,
it. Oh my gosh. For those who don't know, the DSM is a book of description of mental health disorders. It's an easy way to describe it.
yeah, yeah. It's
Interesting.
on like ninth edition or whatever it is, or so.
Yeah.
There's a
Oh, I
lot,
don't even know.
but yeah. So character strengths. What are unique strengths? Everybody has 3 to 5 strengths that are kind of uniquely theirs. So this is a strength that when you can't help but exhibit it. When you exhibit it, things flow easier. You are excited when you're displaying this strength. And these are strengths like, kindness. You may know people that are more compassionate than others. Compassion's one. Optimism, gratitude, and love of learning. That's number one for me. That's my number
Mm-hmm.
one strength. And it makes sense when you think about it. So if you can be more self-aware, understand what it is that makes you tick, and now there's a little formal way to figure that out, and then use your strengths every day, or try to use them every day, whether it's in your job or your free time. You end up being much, much happier, and you
Mm-hmm.
end up actually being more successful, right? People think I'm going to be successful and then I can be happy, right? The equation's actually reversed, right? There's happy people are more successful. They have higher incomes, they have better relationships, they succeed more in their careers in terms of higher positions. So I think that's the other thing that trips doctors up, is it's always been about achievement first and then happiness. Whereas if you can reverse that, you'll get the achievement, but you'll also, more importantly, get the happiness.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's a chicken egg kind of question, but I think you're right. The well-being and happiness have to come, and then the successful and achievement will follow. That's really good points. Mine were bravery and kindness. So really interesting stuff. And I like the idea that you mentioned using your character strengths every day. So I think that would lead down a path of searching for some type of purpose. Can you give an example where someone would maybe use one of those character strengths and like how it would actually work in like a job situation or something like, so just like a concrete example? Because, bravery and kindness and optimism, they're kind of non-tangibles. How do you use something like that as a tool?
Yeah, so I work with a physician who's one of his, I think it was his second or maybe third strength was gratitude.
Hmm.
Uh, but he was a pretty discontent individual. And so what we talked about was figuring out ways to cultivate gratitude every day in work. And he was a radiologist. So one of the things I wanted to get, and I think from a radiologist perspective, we can really infuse a sense of meaning in medicine by when we read about 100 cases a day typically, and that's a lot, right? CTs, MRIs, X-rays. But if you can look at every third case and try to relate that demographic to somebody and read that case from the eyes of reading it for your aunt or your friend's mother or whatever, it really infuses a really powerful sense of purpose rather than just going through a work list and banging
Mhm.
out a bunch of cases. So that was one thing. The other thing is, how do you cultivate gratitude? And we had him do 3 good things every night. That worked pretty well for him. The thing that really worked was negative visualization. So when he would drive home, and these are all the things that I did after that year of positive psychology, and I learned all these interventions, and you pick and choose what works and what doesn't, and sometimes you have to mix them up. But if you can, when you're driving home, and this doesn't take more than 30 seconds, imagine what your life would be like if you mentally subtracted one of the good things from your life. So I said, imagine what your life would be like if you no longer had your job and your group had imploded and you had to go out, brush up your CV, go interview, find a group of people that you liked. We respond much better to bad than good. Our brains are wired that way. And
Mhm.
so mentally subtracting something good and really imagining your life without that, your kids are no longer living with you, they're off to college. If they're like I did this when my kids were younger. I'd come home and there'd be clutter and there'd be chaos and all that stuff. And I started thinking, well, someday they're not going to be here. And now my
Mhm.
oldest is about to go to college next year, and it's true. So you can imagine yourself without your kids living with you.
Mhm.
It makes all that other stuff. It doesn't eliminate it, but it makes it much, much better to appreciate. And that's what happened with him. He really appreciated his job. He appreciated his newfound sense of meaning in reading cases. So
Hmm. I think that's some really cool stuff. So on the other end of things, being a physician who will order those tests and wait for the radiologists to come back and having either, a concerning diagnosis or a reassuring diagnosis, there is a real live person on the end of that report. And I
yeah,
think that's brilliant, especially from someone who, you're sitting in a dark room all day looking at different things. It'd be very quick just to say, oh, this is just another photo, it is another organs, but forget there's
yeah,
a living human
right,
breathing on that. And I think that's a really good idea too, because I was in Florida. When did I move there? It was in 2016 for a really awesome job doing lifestyle medicine, bringing people in. Amazing opportunity. And we were open for 6 months, but our private investors pulled out literally overnight. So I had no job and I'd never been unemployed in my life. And I make more of the money in the household. And I was like, oh. And so it was quite something that I had never experienced. And so I can look back on those experiences. And then I've had three leave me to go off to college. Luckily, there's no more. But my daughter, when she left, she's my oldest. She's 24 now. And I got physically ill when we dropped her off. And she was only 4 hours away. Granted, it was over the Rocky Mountains. We were in Colorado at the time. And I'd never been so like, oh, because I identified as a mom, right? That's what I live for. I mean, I love these kids. So when I see my patients and I'm looking at their little ones and they're calling at their little snotty noses and they're just frazzled, their hair is all crazy. And I'm like, I appreciate those days because they're going to be gone.
yeah, that's
So,
so.
yeah. That's incredible. That's incredible. So I miss those days of loving. Oh, I could talk about kids forever too. So
Me too. I have four of them, so I'm
I
with
can't imagine a fourth one. Jeez Louise. I was already outnumbered with three. Oh man, but it's so much fun. Just I know we are pushing in towards the 45 minutes or an hour here. I could ask a lot of different questions. Is there anything that you would have to say regarding specifically with physician suicide? Because I think it's a topic it was taboo for many times, but there's been a lot of work. There's a doctor, Pamela Weibel. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
you.
But she works a lot with obviously with with families and really bringing to light the issues with medicine and our mental health and our state. As far as physician suicide, do you feel or any evidence or help for those who may be teetering, and where would you suggest, or how would maybe some type of intervention with positive psychology be helpful to someone who's like, I'm heading down the wrong path, I don't like where I'm going? Any suggestions or advice?
Yeah, I mean, physician suicide, I think, is a big problem in medicine, and I think it's not helped by the fact that our licensing and credentialing board asks all those questions. So I think that's the
Right.
first step from a regulatory standpoint that has to change. You have to have a more open culture about that, and it can't just be about wellness committees, which are important and stuff like that. But you have to really address the stigma of a mentally impaired physician,
Hmm.
and that there's an easier pathway to get help and to stay in the system as opposed to being ostracized. So I think that's I mean, we have a lot of sunk time and cost right into medicine. So you can't just easily give that up. And a lot of people will just try to, you know, put their heads down and try to get through it. And then they can't. And it's a really quick transition from the time they realize they can't to the time they're dead. And
Mm.
that's the real problem. So I think, I think well-being index, there's a medical student well-being index, there's a physician well-being index. I think those are important to identify people that are maybe at risk.
Mm.
And I think there should be, a total privacy, physician to physician peer um, group. And I was actually toying around with the idea of, like, you have all these smart physicians that want to make a difference, why not just get a consortium of them and create this group for physicians, create this, confidential peer-to-peer group for physicians that somebody can talk to, whatever institution you are, whatever specialty, and try to catch them before they make that decision. So those are a couple things. In terms of positive psychology, I'm not one of those people that think positive psychology is the answer to everything. I think there are people that have real severe depression, severe anxiety, severe mental health issues that need psychiatric help, need inpatient hospitalizations, need medicine to get them over their acute phase. I don't think that, you know, um, writing about how grateful you are can pull somebody out of a severe depression. And I think that's some of the problems I have with some people in positive psychology, is that they think, well, you don't need antihypertensives because if you just meditate, you'll be good. Um, that may be true, but it's also it's really uh, I think what's the word I'm looking for, but it's irresponsible, I think, for a lot of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so meditation is great. It's recommended by the American Heart Association for a variety of things, but there are some people that need antihypertensives, and just like there are some people that are on that end of the mental health spectrum that need traditional medicine, but we just need to make it easier to get to that.
Mm. There's a lot to unpack here. I like the idea of your consortium. So if you ever do that, let me know. It'd almost be like you'd have a helpline just for physicians, manned by physicians.
Yeah, and by physicians. But I mean, who best to, and you'd have to have some training and stuff like that. But
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think physicians would be, we're lone wolves by nature, right? So
Yeah.
they, they may be more apt to call a physician peer group than they would a national suicide hotline, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, the training would be very helpful. I mean, I trained before I went into medical school. I did a rape crisis hotline, and boy, that changes how you see people in crisis, right? Instead of being judging, you're just like, wow, when they're in full blown crisis, it's different to be on the other end of such a thing. But I think you're right. I don't think people understand, who are lay people who don't have a medical degree, when it comes to licensure. So as in telemedicine, I have 13 medical licenses in 13 states right now. It's a pain to renew. But, every looks like I have usually 8 or 9 each year, or 7 or 6 each year, that renew. And they ask the same questions.
Yeah.
Have you been depressed? Have you used alcohol or been da 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 da? Outside of the legal components of, have you been sued or whatever. But they get personal and ask about certain things, which is unfortunate, because even, let's say, if you were seeing a marriage counselor, that qualifies as, having seen counselor, even if it's not so much you were depressed, but it really inhibits people reaching out for help. Because like you said, this is their livelihood. It's not like I can just go get retrained tomorrow for a month and be okay.
That's
Yeah.
exactly, and that's what the AMA should be doing. I mean, the AMA should be, they have these burnout modules and all that stuff. But what they should really be doing is paving the path and clearing it of roadblocks to get people help.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the AMA does not represent the majority of physicians.
Uh,
I haven't been a member of the AMA since medical school, because it's an organization I feel it's in the political game, and it's not looking out for its constituents. And so I think we need to be removed as an independent physician body run by physicians who actually really care about physicians. And I think that's coming. I think this day and age, with the internet and social media and the interactions and meeting people, I've met people online that have become dear friends in real life. So I'm thankful for that. But you're right. We need to do something. We need to removing obstacles versus adding them. Um, as far as And I agree about the mental health component because it's interesting because I'll have patients who um, have varying degrees. Usually, your primary care doc is your first gatekeeper for reaching mental health, or that's who they reach out to. So you may have someone who says, I am super depressed, and they just basically failed a test, let's say if they're in school. And I have someone else who's literally using the same verbiage, the same words, I'm depressed and on the verge of jumping off a bridge. And it's really interesting to try to assess that. But I agree, there's some things that I'm depressed dealing with my test. I'm depressed, ready to jump off a bridge. And medication is interesting. But there's another book. I want to see if you've read this or have heard of it. It's called The Inflamed Mind by Dr. Edward Bullmore.
No, I read that one too.
Fascinating. So it's a new type of theory, and I think I truly believe in it. The inflammation, or this low level of inflammation that's occurring systemically, inflammation in the brain, he's estimating about a third of cases of anxiety and depression are related to this inflammation. And it's an interesting story that he tells, but he, I think he's from England, and the curious thing was I read a case report of a young gentleman who was 23 who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, within the same year diagnosed with leukemia. And for those who don't know, leukemia is like a blood cancer, and schizophrenia is a very severe mental health disorder. And after he was treated, he had full remission of the leukemia, bone marrow transplant. Within then his schizophrenia went away, and he had no more symptoms, and he was fully like seeing hallucinations. And so it really speaks to what we're doing as a systemic as a whole, like, like that's what I like about positive psychology. It's the whole being, the well-being of everything.
Yeah, it speaks to
um,
the mind-body connection for sure. Right.
right, exactly. And I always tell people, I was like, it doesn't all come down, but a lot of it comes down to what we're doing, movement of our body, but what are we feeding our body? And people are like, oh, because a lot of doctors dismiss nutrition. And I say, well, have your patients stop eating and see what happens. It really is, you are what you eat. If you don't eat, you aren't. So it's really straightforward. Um, but yeah, absolutely. I'm curious too, what does, in your book, and you talk about, what is the ancient and modern wisdom and of kind of converging, how does that converge? Can you just give us a little hint, because I was really intrigued by that. I was like, well, what is the ancient wisdom, like what were we ignoring and now that we're coming back around to it, or is there something new on the horizon? What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ancient wisdom is really returning the goal of life to really be flourishing. And philosophers were talking about, back in the day, you choose philosophy schools much like we choose colleges, right? There'd be various college philosophy schools, and their goal would be to teach us how to live better lives. That was the goal, and it still is the goal of philosophy. Now it's unfortunately relegated to abstract discussions among university professors, but the original goal of philosophy is how do you live a better life? How do you live a good life? The problem with philosophy was it didn't have a roadmap to tell you how to do that. It had a bunch of opinions by a bunch of different philosophers, right? Positive psychology, I think, offers some tactical tools and blueprints to flourish. Mindfulness, gratitude, resilience, grit. There's a whole host of them, and there's evidence behind them. Um, but I think positive psychology sometimes gets wrapped up in the word happy, and it's the cover of Time magazine and all of that stuff. So I tried to combine the original goal of philosophy, which is eudaimonia, flourishing, how to live better, with some of the tactical tools that are being uncovered in positive psychology, to combine them to a kind of a daily code of optimal living, which I call positive philosophy in the book. And then there's basically a daily action plan of less than 15 minutes that, 5 aspects that you can do to really kind of keep on the path of flourishing for you, whatever that may be.
Can you give an example of your daily action plan?
Sure. It's One is you work on something that's improving your potential or getting you closer to your fully realized potential, whatever that may be in at your stage of life. You know, for a medical student like your daughter, it may just be trying to become the best doctor she can be and studying hard at that stage of her life. There's negative visualization for 1 minute a day. That's extremely powerful to do, and I would encourage everybody in the audience to do that. When you're at a stoplight in your car, instead of reaching for your phone to check your email for the 100th time that day, which is what I used to do, you know, just think about one good thing in your life and then imagine your life without it. And, you know, it's neurons that, you know, fire together eventually wire together. And so that's, as you retrain your brain to think about good things and appreciate more and more of what you have, um, you automatically start noticing them in real time. And so it becomes a very virtuous feedback loop. And then, you know, exercise, anything to get your heart racing. You know, I measure heart rate variability in some things, and then gratitude. Either a gratitude letter, you know, once a week or once a month, written to somebody, a teacher, a parent, a friend, or three good things 3 times a week that happened to you and why did they happen. These are kind of simple, but they have a lot of research behind them in positive psychology. And so those are just a few of the action plans.
Yeah, I keep coming back to that negative um, evaluation. So, I mean, if you think, I mean, I think of all the many blessings I have, and I think of even any of them, I start getting heart palpitations. I'm like, oh, wow, this is very powerful because I think there's an emotional connection when you first see it as your blessing. You're like, ah, and then if it's gone, I mean, the mind is so powerful with visualization. It's
That's exactly,
incredible.
yeah. And the problem with the three good things, it's a good exercise and it cultivates gratitude, but you get used to it too,
Mm.
right? It's the hedonic adaptation. You get used to doing that same thing. So by tricking your mind up and reversing it, it's a little bit more powerful.
Right, because we're always running away from pain. I think, that's kind of like when people like will always focus on, when you're talking about nutrition is like, we focus on not what we're giving up, but what we're gaining. I was like, no, actually, I think they kind of need to focus on the painful things they're going to be removing from their life. Not so much, because I think that is a little bit more motivational than looking at, there's always the good stuff too we want to build in, but that pain is a big motivator. I'll
Oh,
tell
yeah,
you what, if I needed a root canal, I'd rather have that tooth pulled than if I think about, winning $1 million. That root canal would need to be fixed first.
absolutely right. I love the expression running away from the bad. That's good.
Oh yeah, definitely running away from the bed. Absolutely. So, just one final question. I always like to ask if you had one piece of advice for someone who, let's say, was like, this is really interesting. Where would they get more information? I will certainly have a link to your book and your website, and so people can look there for more information. But do you have any advice that might maybe just kind of pull the trigger for someone to, it's like go searching more for positive ecology, or maybe where a good introductory into the value and the power that it may have for them?
I think Marty Seligman's book, Flourish and Authentic Happiness.org, has a lot of resources in
Okay.
positive psychology and well-being. So certainly browse around there. I think I would encourage everybody to think about their life and where they are on their scale of flourishing. Um, one quick thing that they can do is your best life exercise, which is really powerful. Take 15 minutes and write about your life in the future, 3 years, 5 years, whatever. Imagine everything going perfectly. No obstacles, don't hold back, and then write it down, write about what that looks like, and then compare where you are and what path you're on to where that life is, because we only get one, and it's cliche that life is short, but it is short. And there's a lot that science is uncovering that we can do about it. So I think that's where I would not hold back to try to improve. Everybody can improve their well-being.
I think that's fabulous advice. And the best life exercise, and what's interesting is it focuses your mind. It's kind of like if you ever buy a new car, or you're looking for a dress or something, and then suddenly like, okay, let's say I'm going to buy a Subaru, and now like everybody has Subarus. Have you noticed like, there's
That,
like a sale on Subarus?
yeah,
Your mind is like, okay, do I need to focus on that? Okay, I'll focus on that for you. It's the same idea. If you write it down, and there's some evidence of written word being really good, not typed out, but actual writing it down,
yeah,
that will help drive you to that. And there's another book, it's called The One Thing. And it's a pretty good idea to bring it back down to something very, very simple. And just, this is my goal. If that, of all of that wonderful life that I want to have in, let's say, 5 years, what's the one thing that would be the most impactful? And then go, okay, what can I do on an annual basis that I can do to bring this? And then to a monthly, to a weekly, to a daily, and to right now, to the one thing that I can do now, because that empowers people to break it down into smaller pieces and move towards it. But I love that. I do that with my nutrition folks all the time.
no, it's great.
Yeah, it's very, very good. Well, thank you so much for your time. The audience thanks you, and we so appreciate your wisdom and everything that you're doing to help physicians and bring us to a better place emotionally and mentally in our well being.
Oh, sure, it's my pleasure. Really nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you too.